Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth day of the NIC.br Annual Workshop on Survey Methodology. And this year's theme is Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Data Production. This series of webinars is organized by the Regional Center for Studies on the Development of the Information Society, Cetic.br, which is a department of the Brazilian Network Information Center, NIC.br, and is also co-organized by the National School of Statistical Science, linked to the Brazilian Institute of the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, the IBGE. I'm Tatiana Gereissati, coordinator of sectoral studies and qualitative methods at Cetic.br, and I'm pleased to be the moderator of this webinar today. This special online edition marks the 10-year anniversary of this workshop, and we are happy to share this occasion with the 608 participants that have registered for this year's event. For those of you that are joining us for the very first time today, a few very brief announcements. All webinars are being recorded and will be made available through our event website. The webinar is being delivered in English, and simultaneous translation is also being offered into Portuguese. You are invited to ask questions to speakers through the question and answer box. And lastly, please check your emails for guidelines on how to obtain your certificate of attendance. So we began this webinar series by highlighting the need for a human-centered and ethical approach to artificial intelligence. We then discussed the complex challenges in defining and measuring artificial intelligence to inform policymaking. Following, we discussed the increasing data demands worldwide, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the relevance of data journalism and data literacy in this scenario. So today, we will delve into the challenges faced by data providers in times where, on the one hand, there is an urgent need for robust and timely data to measure the impacts of the pandemic. And on the other, not only are resources lacking, human and financial, but organizations also need to adjust their regular strategies of data production in the context of social distancing. So to discuss this subject matter, our webinar today is structured in the following way. First, we will open with a keynote presentation of 30 minutes, followed by an invited talk of 15 minutes. Then we will open for questions and answers. We will then break for 5 minutes and resume with a second keynote presentation, followed by a second invited talk. All speakers will be invited to address questions from the floor after they have delivered their presentation. So without further ado, to open today's webinar, I'm pleased to invite our keynote speaker, Francesca Perucci, who is Assistant Director of the United Nations Statistics Division. Francesca will share her presentation with her colleague, Vibeke Nielsen, also from the UNSC. I know that these are extremely busy times for you, Francesca, so thank you very much for your time today. Francesca, how has the global statistical community been responding to the pressing needs for data production through this crisis? And what has been the role of the UNSC? Please share with us some of the work that you have been conducting in the past few months. You have the floor for 30 minutes. Welcome, Francesca.
Thank you, Tatiana, and good morning, colleagues. Good afternoon for those who are following from other parts of the world. And thanks so much to all of you, our colleagues in Brazil, from the Brazilian Network Information Center, from the National School of Statistics, Denise, Alexandre, Tatiana, all the other colleagues. It's great to be with you, and thank you for the opportunity to share some of the work that we've been doing at the UN Statistics Division to sort of respond to the new data needs that the COVID-19 crisis has brought up. So allow me to just share a few slides, and as you said, Vibeke Nielsen will join the presentation in a little bit, and Vibeke is the interregional advisor in our division for SDGs, statistics and indicators. So she has a lot of experience in working directly with countries and assisting them in their efforts to meet the data demands. So as the COVID pandemic has clearly demonstrated the importance of data, including to save lives and livelihoods, but it also has exacerbated data inequalities. So we've seen that as countries need data more urgently than before, because data are so key in tracking the pandemic, in planning and monitoring all the responses, the efforts, the new measures that the countries are undertaking. And to inform also what will be the recovery strategies as we emerge from the crisis. We see that statistical operations are seriously disrupted. Office closures in many countries, most countries, poor connectivity in countries that doesn't allow them to do work remotely as some of us do, and overall disruption of all regular face-to-face data collection operations, from surveys to censuses. So there is a need to sort of rethink and repurpose our work and our initiatives. Before I move into what we do specifically to address the new demands due to the pandemic, I'd like to say a few words of how our division approaches innovation. And innovation, of course, is key, especially now that we all have to sort of rethink the way we work to address the new data demands. So our vision is really to promote innovation through the official statistical system. So rather than creating sort of separate tracks, we try to integrate all the new tools and the technology into the official statistical production, and really placing the national statistical offices at the center. So empowering the national statistical offices to play a bigger role, to sort of go a whole new level, and rather than just being data producers, they become more like data stewards, coordinating the data production across the statistical system and beyond, with new data actors coming on board, and play more a role of those who ensure the rigor and the quality of the data. And for that, we have a whole set of principles and parameters that we have to follow. So we have, of course, the fundamental principles of official statistics. Those of us who are more from the official statistical system, of course, are very familiar with those. Those are like our Bible, and we follow them very carefully, as they guarantee the independence and the quality of the data we provide to society. So we have also a framework to ensure data quality and to assist and give countries the tool to test and assess the quality. And we have open data principles that include, of course, tools and principles for interoperability. And just to show you a little bit of what I'm talking about, you know, those are the fundamental principles. Of course, you can read them, but there are 10 principles. We have guidelines on data interoperability that have been also adopted by the UN Statistical Commission. So they have a certain level of formality. And we're working currently with a working group of the Statistical Commission on Open Data to further develop the tools for data interoperability. And we also work with the group to promote principles of open data in various ways, including, for instance, open data for in smaller geographical settings, in cities, etc. So when it comes to smaller geographical units, open data policies and principles, of course, are particularly important, and you need specific guidance, and many other topics that the working group is working on to really promote the adoption of open data policies and principles, and allowing the data that you have, to extract the maximum value from them, to become interoperable, and to ensure that you really make the best use of all data sets that statistical and data system can provide broadly. So COVID-19, of course, has posed new challenges, but has also pushed us, has challenged really the statistical community and the data community to move faster and to really respond to the data demands in a new way and in a more agile, I would say, way. And we've seen that. Of course, you know, countries have faced enormous constraints. But they've also, most national statistical offices really have stepped up to the challenge. And they've really tried as fast as possible to leverage modern technologies and use new data sources. They've really coordinated well across the system, and they've used data sets from different parts of both the official statistical system and beyond. They've created partnerships with private sector. They used the mobile phone records. They've used all different types of new data sources beyond the traditional approaches. And they've really demonstrated that this system works, that the National Statistical Office can really play that role, can really link up the different data sets, ensure the quality and the rigor of the data. So how have we approached this from our point of view as UN Statistics Division? We, of course, received a good number of requests. You can imagine, countries immediately saw their regular statistical operations interrupted. Many countries were in the middle of either planning for the 2020 population census round, or in the very middle of the operations themselves, or surveys. So they had to halt, in many cases, those operations. So they requested support and guidance on how to proceed. At the start in spring, when right after the pandemic hit, we planned a survey together with the World Bank and in cooperation with the regional commissions, the five regional commissions of the UN. We planned a survey to try and understand how countries were coping, what the real constraints were, and what obstacles they were facing, and what their needs were. So the survey has been undertaken since then. We are currently doing the third round of the survey. We had one that completed right before the summer, and one that was a little bit later in July, and we'll have the results of the current round in the next couple of weeks. We also immediately put together a website where we could share knowledge, where we could share experiences, where countries that were more advanced in responding with new tools and new approaches could share their experience with other countries. And there we created different spaces under different topics, including open data and using open data principles to share trusted data on the pandemic. And we try to also bring together the available data, and that was done with an approach that we call a federated system. And you'll see later we also have a federated system for the SDGs, but based on the same principle of bringing together the national data hub in a global space where users can access both the global data and the national data. We put together this the UN Statistics Division COVID-19 Data Hub, and there you can find data at the global level. Of course, we chose the data from the Johns Hopkins University database, which is the one that's most widely used across the world. And then there we federate the national data hubs from countries that have established their own data platforms to share data on the pandemic. And then, as you'll hear a little bit later, we have launched a new collaborative on the use of administrative data sources for statistical purposes. And that, again, is a way to help countries use different data sets in a moment where they cannot undertake the regular face-to-face data collection operations. And in general, we promote that as a very good approach for bringing together different data sets from the statistical systems for development data overall. And we'll hear from Vibeke a little bit more about that initiative. We also refocused our global events. Many of you might know that we were planning the third UN World Data Forum that was supposed to be in Bern in Switzerland this year. But it has now become a virtual event like the one we're having today, and all large events are now held virtually. But we have also repurposed the content of the forum, which will have a strong focus on how we are responding to the challenges of the new data demands for COVID-19. And also sharing the experiences that the COVID-19 has brought to us as a sort of, sadly, an opportunity for the statistical and data system to show what can be done when you really bring together different tools and you really step up innovation and accelerate the modernization of the statistical systems. And we have also repurposed all our capacity building projects. One good example is our project on SDG monitoring that covers 20 countries, where we bring capacity development for the establishment of SDGs data platforms and coordination of statistical and data systems in countries, and we promote user engagement and better way of communicating data to the users. So that project became very much focused on the response to COVID-19 and became also, of course, the delivery of training and all support became remote. So just a few words about the survey that I mentioned just earlier. What the survey has revealed, that is, of course, as I said, you know, the face-to-face data collection were interrupted. From May to July, from the first round to the second round, we see that the data collection has resumed in part, but still not completely. That's the chart to your left. And we see that there is still a very high level of uncertainty. So countries, 53% of countries responded that they do not know whether and when they will be able to resume face-to-face interviews. So still a high degree of uncertainty in planning, let's say, regular statistical operations. Most countries have been able quickly to adapt to the COVID-19 situation, and they've adopted new and different data collection approaches, and adding different questions, reducing questionnaires content, reducing the sample sizes. But overall, you know, they've changed the data collection mode to use an alternative way of collecting data, and that's close to 60% of countries respond. But what we see, as I was saying earlier, you know, countries are facing constraints and they are in need for additional support. And that is clearly exacerbating inequalities across countries, because we see that countries that already were prepared to respond, you know, with remote tools to go from face-to-face interviews to telephone-based or web-based interviews, were able to work remotely. Those were quickly able to adapt and to continue the operations, while countries that were that faced poor connectivity or were not set up to respond with a more agile system, they're really in desperate need for additional support. And you see that the chart to your left refers to low and lower middle income countries that they all need, greatly need or moderate need the yellow additional support, versus the upper middle income countries that are a lot more autonomous in that sense to be able to respond to the crisis. So another area that I'd like to mention is the type of assistance that we provide on how to repurpose and how to reshape the household survey programs in countries to respond to the crisis. We have an intersecretariat working group on household surveys that is composed by agencies that are responsible for either conducting household surveys, like the MIX by UNICEF, or assisting countries in specific thematic areas, like ILO on labor force, WHO on health, etc. So that we have a new task force that deals specifically with COVID-19, and it aims at coordinating the COVID-19 impact surveys, provide guidance to countries in order for them to maintain continuity of survey programs, and also provide a vision for what could be the new normal after COVID-19. And you see, we provide the links there for those who are interested to learn more. There is a website, and these are some extractions from what we have, and the material that is on the website. And these are some of the tools that we offer to countries, including a technical guidance on how to plan and carry out a survey during COVID-19 for those who are undertaking face-to-face, how you minimize the risk of transmission, how you sort of limit, the exposure during the field collection, and how at the same time you can ensure high quality results even under these more difficult circumstances. And there are other forthcoming tools on which we're working, including guidelines on spatial anonymization, how we disseminate survey microdata, guidance to countries on a more comprehensive survey program where you integrate different household surveys, small area estimates, and sampling specifically for vulnerable populations. Again, this is an example of what we have on the website in terms of guidance to countries and on national responses, the impact surveys, and the methodology guidance. And this is what we see as the post-COVID. So what is going to be the new normal in undertaking face-to-face or new survey approaches? So we are proposing a systematic assessment of national data needs. So with a vision towards a whole comprehensive household survey program, strengthening survey infrastructure so that countries can undertake both web-based or telephone-based surveys. And while we promote the approach on the tools themselves to collect the data, we also promote innovation as in terms of integrating survey data with different data sources and new data sources. So the big data with the household survey, integrating them and making the best use of the different data sets. And then, of course, that implies making survey data more interoperable, strengthening the technical skills of staff, and improving the adoption of principles for data access and data privacy. And then building empirical evidence in developing countries so that we can show what can be done, what the constraints are, how you overcome those constraints, how you validate the data, how you allow for data integration to happen. So this is what the group will be working in terms of offering the new tools for the post-COVID-19. So as I anticipated, we also have a collaborative on the use of administrative data sources for statistical purposes, and Vibeke has been leading that work. So I'd like to pass it on to her to say a few words about that. Thank you, Tatiana. Vibeke, over to you.
Thank you, Francesca, and good morning to everyone. Very glad to be able to be part of this conference that seems to be very interesting and to the point. So as Francesca was mentioning, we initiated a new collaborative back in May as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic as well, because we saw that there was an urgent need to support countries and for countries to have a platform to discuss the use of administrative sources for statistical purposes, which is of course also important in the longer term. So we're bringing in that aspect as well. The collaborative was started and is co-convened by UNSD and the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. And we currently have around 30 countries from different regions joining us, as well as international and regional agencies. We wanted first and foremost to be a platform for collaboration and sharing of knowledge and experiences. And we are focusing on implementing and discussing simple and ready to implement solutions that address priority gaps in the countries. So one of the first things that we have agreed already to focus on is to create an inventory of resources where we would learn from each other and also share a lot of practical examples, including good practices from different countries. And the reason why we wanted to focus on this is because we know that there is already work going on along different thematic areas. We know that there is a lot of work going on civil registration and vital statistics, on business registers, and on use of health registers for statistical purposes. But we saw this need to focus specifically on the processes around using administrative data for statistical purposes and to learn from each other across thematic areas, across regions, and across countries. But also acknowledging that there is a lot of materials out there, our first step is to really create this inventory to have that as a starting point. And once we know a little bit better what is happening in all the different areas, we hope to develop further tools and guidance. Now in the first place, of course, with a specific COVID-19 angle, but then also in the longer term with other objectives. So in the countries, we're currently mainly including national statistical offices, but we are encouraging them also to bring in the administrative data owners to the discussions, because we believe that, of course, is important because we need that discussion and exchange. But we are, and some of them have already done so. So next slide, yes. Here is a practical example from Ghana, where the Ghana Statistical Service was very early on in accessing data from the Ministry of Health, and also then showcasing it on the COVID-19 platform that they, I guess, was among the first countries really to set up. So they're basically in their COVID-19 platform showcasing a lot of data from the Ministry of Health in terms of deaths and cases, etc. While at the same time, they're also bringing in their own data on, for instance, access to clean water, access to soap. So by combining data, you get a lot of additional interest. So that is a practical example that we already have been sharing in the collaborative. And we know that the Statistical Service of Ghana is already using other sources as well. Next slide. So back to the collaborative, the first meetings were at the general level with all members, but we have now split up into 3 task teams to be able to discuss the topics a bit more in detail. We have one task team that is looking more kind of overall on the institutional frameworks, the coordination and the partnerships. We have one that is focusing more on the data management, standardizing, harmonizing standards, definitions, etc., which is important both within the statistics offices, but also with the administrative data owners. And then a much more technical approach with the interoperability and linking. And this links back to the idea of kind of having 3 different angles to the work. One is to bring together the processes to kind of look along the different process aspects, from first being able to obtain the data to producing them, processing them, linking them potentially with other sources, and then publishing them. Then the different thematic areas to bring in the experiences across into each of these task teams. And then also different levels of maturity. Some countries in the collaborative are very experienced. They use mainly administrative sources and can share their experience, while other countries are really just starting. So, so the materials will also be aligned along that line to some extent. So the goals, as has already been mentioned to some extent, is to identify the specific challenges within the focus area, and together explore which useful solutions could be drawn from the existence materials, and then also agree on different approaches to deliver support to the wider collaborative and a wider audience moving forward. 2 other initiatives that we also wanted to mention that encourage really data innovation and data integration is an initiative that we are running together with, again, the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, with the Sustainable Development Solutions Networks, STSN, and also with the World Bank. The initiative is called Data for Now and was launched last year. It supports countries in the use of innovative sources, technologies, and methods so that we can have more timely and disaggregated data for the sustainable development. But it's also relevant to the COVID-19 situation, using alternative data sources to get more timely and relevant information in that context. So there are currently 8 countries that we're supporting in this context, that are really the pilot countries. But we're already also looking at expanding to other countries because there is a lot of interest in the work. We have some results from some of the countries in terms of putting together the sources in different ways, talking with a lot of also non-government actors, private sector, international agencies, etc. So I think it will be quite exciting to see how that moves forward and learning from the experiences that these 8 countries are making. The last one I also briefly wanted to mention is, or come back to, is what Francesca mentioned earlier as well, the Federated Information System for the SDGs, where we really allow, or we have a platform that allows more international reporting along with the national reporting, but also integration and analysis of the SDGs across the systems of the federated data hubs. Thank you from me, and back to you, Francesca.
Thank you, Vibeke. And just to conclude, we should not forget about the importance of making use of the data we're able to produce. Without using data, we know we cannot inform the necessary actions, both to address the challenges of the global health and now economic crisis, and restart and go back on track to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So we place a lot of emphasis on how we communicate the data, making sure that they are used and that they are available to policymakers. We try to take a storytelling approach where we really extract the messages from the data so that we can support effective policy and decision making. So just a few snapshots to the right of the screen to show you what we have. We have country profiles on SDGs. We have the global report on Sustainable Development Goals that also is published as an interactive tool on a GIS platform and other tools that you can find on our website. Over to Tatiana, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Francesca and Vibeke, for a really very informative and insightful presentation. We are taking questions from the floor, and we will open after the following presentation. So participants still have an opportunity to share their questions with us. And moving on to our next presentation, I would now like to give the floor to Eduardo Hughes, who is the Research Director at the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, IBGE. Eduardo, national statistical offices are a key resource of information, and more than ever, we need reliable and timely statistics for important decision-making. How is IBGE dealing with these sudden and unprecedented challenges, which includes issues such as using new methods to collect, process, and analyze data while working from home? Thank you very much for being here, Eduardo. The floor is yours for 15 minutes. Eduardo, we can't hear you. We can't hear you very well. There seems to be a technical issue with the sound.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you better. I think there is an issue with the volume.
See the PowerPoint there?
Now we can hear you. You have not yet shared your PowerPoint presentation with us.
Let me see. Is it there now?
Not yet, but if you prefer, I can manage your slides for you.
Okay, so I would appreciate that. It's one less concern. First, take of all to thank you very much to be here. It's my second turn now in a webinar, not in person. It's my second participation in the workshop. The previous one, I was not at IBGE yet, so I was on a different position. I would like to state that this presentation is based on a presentation that Susana Guerra, the president, presented on an international forum. So it's pretty much an official position from IBGE. So it's not a personal academic view on that. It's really a description of IBGE's experience during this period. Can you move to the next slide, please? So when the COVID-19 started in Brazil in March, we had to establish social distancing, not only in data collection, but also in our work context. Next, please. So and that was in mid-March, and the main challenge was to maintain our production during the pandemic period that was quite uncertain and still is how long it would last. So IBGE is key to the estimation of GDP in Brazil, inflation rate, unemployment rate, and other indicators. Next, please. So from March 17, we had this challenge to establish social distance and still try to maintain nearly our statistics. So far, we have been successful on that. That's always a challenge. Next, please. So we had like 6 areas of change. We had to work remotely. We had to do some technological transformation. We had to change our approach towards surveys. We wanted to create new pulse surveys, and we had to change or increment our learning, training strategy and our dissemination strategy. So these were the 6 areas of change during this period. Next, please. So we had to, of course, we have a IT directorship at IBGE, but all of a sudden we had to establish a remote work platform with VPNs and several challenges, and they were done expeditiously. And we had, of course, you always have complaints and problems, but the matter of the fact is that everyone jokes that we are working more than we were working before social distancing regarding webinars, meetings, remote meetings, and so on. Next, please. And another area that we incremented was big data strategies. Of course, we were already working on that, but we had to accelerate process on that. Matching strategies, for example, is a good case. We had matching experience, but we had never used as many matchings as we did after the social distance. For example, a good case is to obtain phone numbers to conduct our surveys. And regarding, for example, price investigations, we couldn't collect in person the prices on the supermarkets and the commercial stores. So we had to rely on the internet. And due to that, we incremented through ACT's technological exchange agreements our capacity to do web scraping. So after the pandemic, we expect that price collection will be much more leading edge than it's now. And it's already been. So we are developing a whole strategy of collecting prices through web scraping. Next, please. And regarding household surveys, that's where we advanced a lot, matching our cadastro, our register of households with other databases, mainly to collect telephones, but and to keep our surveys on. The main household survey at IBGE is the PNAD contínua, and we feared that PNAD contínua could face discontinuation, and it is so key to basic indicators for Brazil, like GDP and per capita income, that include, in a way, these indicators affect resources allocation in the government. So the creation of a pulse survey called PNAD COVID-19 was not only aimed at bringing new information regarding the pandemics, but also to have like a step strategy in case PNAD contínua had to be phased down temporarily. Next, please. So, and also we had this communication strategy. I will talk about the hot site for PNAD COVID later on. Next, please. In the two new surveys, in addition to maintaining PNAD contínua, which is a household survey, and our economic surveys that we have for economic statistics, we decided to create a PNAD COVID survey, which is a house survey, and also pulse survey for small and medium enterprises. Next, please. So next, you can move to the next. And the COVID-19 survey of small enterprise was very successful. We started in June and just discontinued now in September. So he had like a short leave. He added lots of information about how firms were coping. It was the first time that the IBGE did a pulse survey for firms. It might be replicated in the future, but after this discontinuation, we do not intend to come back in the short future. Next, please. And the PNAD COVID-19 survey was a combination, as I said, was first of all a step strategy for the case that PNAD continuo was discontinued during the period. But in addition, we had inspired on the flu surveys, CDC flu surveys and other flu surveys in the US and in the world, and also to labor surveys. ILO had some models for pulse surveys associated with labor. We designed this questionnaire that was not as short as a true pulse survey, was a little bit bigger, but we decided that, and we had Pedro Nascimento was part of it. We had a wonderful team in sampling to decide the strategy, and the idea, it was very innovative, was to create a panel based on a previous PNAD continuous survey. So we followed the same households through these months, and each week you had an independent sample. We divided the sample in 4, and it's been very interesting. The response rate was very good. It was a telephone interview, and we are planning to discontinue that in some point in the either November or December, because the households are kind of tired. We are starting to have attrition on that, and PNAD continuo, after all, was not discontinued. So we are facing some challenges of transition for the near future, for the moment. Next, please. Maisa is attending the meeting, and ENCE, which is a partner to this seminar, was key, because for the first time for the PNAD COVID-19, we implemented full training in long distancing, and ENCE's background on that was key. And we did that with temporary workers that were hired for the census. We had postponed the census from 2020 to 2021, and these professionals, the censitários, they were the ones who conducted the interview, trained by ENCE, and in that regard, we could keep them in our workforce rather than firing them and hiring again with transaction costs for the census operation in 2021. So we were very successful in the PNAD COVID in keeping these people working and also increasing their productivity as a kind of a job training activity. Next, please. And regarding dissemination, we created a hot site with all statistics on COVID-19 using GIS information and including the statistics in maps and being a very dynamic thing with dashboards and so on. Next, please. And now, in conclusion, just to assess the experience, we are moving to a new challenge with to face the 2021 demographic census with even more budgetary cut. So we now have 2 billion. But we learned a lot. I'm very confident. I mean, this experience of going through COVID-19 with little loss regarding statistics made us very confident. One area which was mentioned in the previous presentation is the mixed mode of data collection. So we kind of moved from our DMCs, our computer-assisted personal interview, to a computer-assisted telephone interview. And so like the COVID-19 was totally CATI rather than CAPI. And more so, I guess, compared with several developed countries, strategies regarding telephone interview, we didn't have that experience of massive telephone interview in households. We had that in economic service, but not in household service. A new mode, and I gathered that other national statistic offices faced that, at least in the developing world, is rather than using a concentrated lab, kind of telephone lab for the interviews, a centrais telefônica, we did a CATI approach, decentralized, with the researcher that traditionally would apply the personal interview. And it worked quite well, much better than we expected, to the extent that our coverage is basically calculated by the lack of telephones and matchings that we did. Nearly the refusal rate is quite low, and the quality is above what expected. So all this CATI learning process is very important to another theme addressed previously, which is the uncertainty. So we are going to the 2021 census with some sort of certainty regarding the pandemic and regarding social distancing. So we are prepared to a mixed mode census operation in which we can adapt for the specific regions' challenges. And all that came from this learning that we had during the pandemic. And also new techniques, the grid population density estimations that have been around in the world. We are implementing a project like that, not for population estimation, because I have a good demographic department and we do that, but to calculate household densities at grid level so that it could be helpful in the 3 phases of the census operation. For the pre-enumeration phase that we are not going to do in person, so you do an electronic pre-enumeration evaluation. For monitoring the enumeration phase and in helping the post-enumeration survey that we will be conducting, we will do the grid estimation to help that so that we can impute any sort of coverage problem that we may face. I guess that's all. Next, please. Thank you very much. And it was a challenge what was posed for the COVID at IBGE, but without the difficulties, the IBGE's spirit, in a way, combined with good intelligence and good technology, is helping us to overcome that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. And I truly think it has been an important learning experience for all. And it's good to hear that the NSOs have stepped up to the challenge in these complex times and used this opportunity also for innovation. And Eduardo, you mentioned that this is your second participation in our workshop, and you're right, you were our keynote speaker in 2014. Thank you for this reminder. And Francesca, this is also her second time round with us. So we are honored to have both of you on board again. Thank both of you very much, and Vibeke as well, for your excellent interventions. And I would now like to give a chance for all speakers to address the very interesting questions that we received from the floor. So now we have a 15-minute session for question and answer. I will start with a question on the context of inequalities in face of the COVID-19 crisis and data production. So Javiera would like to know, in a context in which data production is affected, how do we face data inequalities? How can countries guarantee that the most vulnerable populations are represented in the data production, especially during the pandemic? So perhaps Francesca or Vibeke would like to address this question, and then we will pass the floor to Eduardo.
Thank you, Tatiana.
Sure.
Sure. Sorry. Yeah, no, that's the key question, I think, because number one, countries can address the challenges differently based on the type of connectivity they had. So right there, you already have inequalities because some countries have poor connectivity, so they cannot respond the same way as those who can guarantee the remote work and different types of data collection, web-based, telephone-based, etc. And that is an issue also on how you replace face-to-face data collection. If you undertake, telephone-based or web-based surveys, there is an enormous risk of overlooking and undercounting and underrepresenting overall different types of vulnerable groups, so different communities, different ethnic groups, etc. So the strategy, we are of course offering guidelines on how you can maintain some level of face-to-face data collection so that you can have a sort of a mixed approach exactly to respond to that need, being able to capture those groups of the population that are harder to reach, right? And they would not be able to do telephone-based or web-based. So that type of mixed approach, of course, where you do both, and you have to have guidelines on how you ensure safety, for instance, for the enumerators and the respondents, so that you can still do a certain level of actual physical data collection. And then you have to have skills and very good training to ensure comparability of results so that you don't introduce biases. But that's of course a challenge, and that's something we all have to keep in mind when we use the new tools of data collection and the new data sources, alternative and different data sets in understanding, what the composition of our population is, so that we have tools to capture all different groups. Over. I don't know if Vibeke wants to add from the administrative data sources point of view.
Perhaps I can ask a follow-up question, which is linked to your response, Francesca. Fabio wants to know if you think that the COVID-19 outbreak will cause more permanent impacts to household surveys, such as the decrease in response rates? And what are your perspectives in adopting mixed methods of data collection to better achieve different populations? And with this, I would like to add a question which was specifically directed to Eduardo, which is, what percentage of the 2021 census will be collected through remote modes, such as telephone and the internet? And with this, perhaps Eduardo could also elaborate on this strategy of using mixed modes and this learning experience. Is this a strategy? Eduardo wants to know if this could be a strategy to reduce budget in a time of constraints in resources. And I would add, if perhaps Eduardo could elaborate, what are the disadvantages and advantages of using this mixed approach? So perhaps Eduardo can begin addressing this question.
Okay, good question. Right now, it's hard because of the uncertainty of next year to establish a percentage. And actually, we are hitting again. We never stopped planning the census. And I'm sure we will have a better census in 2021 than we would have had in 2020, just because we have 1 year extra of planning in lots of improvement in operation control due to the pandemics. We learned a lot and that's, of course, going to be added to the census experience. But on the other hand, we are very conservative. We are keeping the original technical project for the census. So even the mixed mode, because when we talk about modes, we could have a concomitant application of modes, different modes, telephone and personal, or a sequential mode. Logically, we thought about the sequential mode as a good strategy, but the uncertainty and the heterogeneity and the size of the country led us to be more flexible. We don't want to impose constraints in our operation that's going to be hard. So in a way, the mixed mode will be totally flexible and concurrent rather than sequential as a survival strategy. And in that sense, telephone will be by no means a strategy for saving and accommodating budget. The simulations that we have the same interviewer, the same recenseador doing both operations, having the same price. I mean, that's the legitimacy that we have for the operation. So we don't see telephone interviews as a safety. In the beginning, I even thought about that, but when we did the simulations, we realized it's going to be, with the short budget that we have, a tight operation. No doubt about that. But telephone is not there for saving money. Telephone is there for safety concerns and for risk avoidance. That's the main message. And what we are improving a lot, and I really mean it, is intelligence, technological control of the whole operation. That's where I think the major innovation will be. Like the grid projection and the softwares processing, knowing by interviewer the kind of efficiency, monitoring, coverage concerns. That's where my bet, of course, I expect that it's not a wishful thinking, but that's where my bet is that will be our major innovation.
Thank you for these important clarifications. We are unfortunately running out of time, but I would like to ask two final questions. There are a few important questions on privacy concerns. So one question is regarding privacy. Leonardo wants to know, regarding privacy issues and privacy laws around the world, how do you see the future of data collection? Can this growing concern with privacy harm the development of an alternative sources of data production? And Eduardo also asked something similar. He mentions that that telephone operator indicators can be used to determine data on COVID-19, and these are not sometimes foreseen and may violate data protection regulations. Do you see that they could and should be used to fight the pandemic? In other words, what should prevail, the right to privacy or the right to life, he asks. And a final question, because I think it's interesting to address the issue of artificial intelligence, which is the overarching theme of our webinar. Liliane wants to know if Eduardo could mention, Eduardo mentioned the use of emerging technologies by using AI tools for controlling the field. And she would like you to elaborate and mention what kind of AI tools are you using for this in this process, which you just mentioned in your last answer. So perhaps I can give the floor to Francesca and Vibeke to address very quickly these questions, and then pass over the floor to Eduardo to conclude.
Yeah, thank you. That's the critical question during COVID-19, and we followed, the discussion has been at various levels in all countries. how do you strike a balance between ensuring trust and protection of privacy and using the tools that you have to address the pandemic in a timely manner, right? So there are a lot of there's a lot of work going on, including WHO has the World Health Organization has a panel specifically dedicated to that, you know, setting the principles and the guidance on how you use data and maintain the level of trust and ensure privacy. It all comes down to laws, regulations, principles, and best practices. So having the right governance system that allows you to bring in the data sets and at the same time protect privacy and guaranteeing the quality of the data so the data can be trusted. You protect data rights and you protect the privacy of the citizens. So, and best practices. We are all moving really fast because there is a need to move fast and there is a need to address the data needs on an urgent basis. And this is a question of life and death in some cases, because if you don't have the data, if you don't know where the vulnerable people are and what they're doing and how they're moving and what they're accessing, etc., you can't save their lives. So you have to really strike a balance. And again, it's a question of sharing best practices, ensuring a good governance system. And that's where National Statistical offices, I think, have a lot to offer. And privacy regulators in countries are doing an enormous amount of work also. Over. I know we are out of time. There is so much to say. But
thank you, Francesca. Yes, it is unfortunate. Let me give the floor to Eduardo before we close.
Thank you. I'll try to be short. I agree with Francesca. It's very complex. I mean, the privacy issue, I've been attending their webinars, listening to UN, mostly UNSD and other UN agencies dealing with that. In Brazil, for example, the statistical law tend to be forgotten. And the privacy law, maybe the statistical law, the safety of the information that national statistical offices have to abide, it should be even stronger than the right protection law because it's right protection at the extreme. But I would say that some of the groups regarding this in Brazil, they're not being educated in a way. It's our fault on how statistical offices run this kind of business. And but on the other hand, so we had a judicial challenge that we lost. I guess every Brazilian know about that. And that was damaging to us, but we could overcome that just by matching, just by intelligence. And the nice thing is that the social policies in COVID proved that the Brazilian poor, everyone has a mobile phone. And we had a jump of coverage in admin data that is definitely going to help our operation in case of social justice. We don't want to use that if it's not necessary, but we don't want to miss it. Regarding the AI thing, there are several programs. What we did is, I like to use the word reloginhos, like in an airplane control devices that every airplane has. We are developing at IBGE something that is not part of the technological project of the census, but is the division, it's a group that's developing intelligence controls for the whole census operation as we go to the enumeration phase. So we do sex ratio, age structure, and so on. That's one part. But we also do coverage, monitoring on a daily basis. And we also intend, and that's the question, there are some softwares that get the log of the data collection. And they analyze the log of the data collection. So you have a tree for every interview on how long that it take, how many times you have to, in a very speedy manner. And that's what I'm calling a control monitoring technology, where my bet is there will be our major innovation regarding the quality of the census operation. Given the fact that we have a tight budget, we need that.
Of course.
But I'm very confident. We have the time to develop that now.
Thank you for this very important information. I'm very sorry that we are out of time. We are actually already over time, but this has been an extremely interesting and important conversation. So a very big thank you to Francesca, Vibeke, and Eduardo for your time. I'm really happy to see that we have so many questions coming in, but we have to close the session. We will now take a 5-minute comfort break and then resume shortly for our second keynote presentation and invited talk. So thank you very much to the speakers of this first session. I will see you all soon.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, Tatiana.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. We are back. And before we give the floor to our second keynote of the day, I would like to send a very short poll for everyone to answer on our internet data. So you have a few seconds to answer. According to the ITU, which is the proportion of the global population using the internet? So the majority of the answers are indeed correct, 53.6%. Next question. According to the ITU, in 2019, the gender gap among internet users worldwide was? And the correct answer is 17%. Following question. Only 2 more to go before we give the floor to our next speaker. In Brazil, what is the proportion of internet users that access the internet exclusively through their mobile phone? And the answer is? %58%. Indeed. Last question. In Brazil, what is the proportion of internet users in rural areas? The results? %53%. This is only to say that in the context of this pandemic, where the internet is so important, we still have a large proportion of users, of non-users of the internet, of people that are not internet users. We still have a very large gender gap in terms of use of the internet. We still have a large amount of the population in Brazil that use the internet exclusively through their mobile phones and that are doing so throughout the pandemic, and we still have a very large proportion of the population in Brazil, especially in rural areas, that are not internet users. So to begin the second round of presentations, we can now invite our next speaker, which is Andrés Gutierrez, to deliver his keynote presentation. Andrés is the regional expert on social statistics at the Statistics Division of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. Andrés, we know that the pandemic follows different trajectories in each region of the world, and also that there are many differences between national statistical systems. So I would like to know how countries in our region have been dealing with the challenge of producing data with scarce resources amidst the crisis that we are facing. Andrés, thank you very much indeed for being here today, and you have the floor for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Tatiana. It is a pleasure to be here with you. Congratulations on your 10th anniversary of this workshop on survey methodology. And welcome to this journey that will summarize the history of the COVID-19 in the region and how NSOs has achieved the collection of household surveys. I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if you can. Can you see my presentation?
We can. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So the presentation is called COVID-19 Pandemic and Household Surveys, and of course is focused on the recommendations from UN-ECLAC. So we have these movement restrictions, and yeah, in an attempt to prevent the rapid spread of the disease, most governments in the region, in Latin America and in the Caribbean, imposed different measures restricting basically citizens' mobility. In some cases, the restrictions were partial, in others more drastic. In some countries, we had curfews or mandatory quarantines and other health measures. So this movement restriction have led, obviously, to the suspension of face-to-face data collection. So national statistical offices had abruptly to discontinue the collection of this information. And it was not only household surveys, but also it affected many other statistical operations. So the NSOs are now carrying out surveys over the telephone or the internet, and this represents a change that it must be faced analytically. And it all began on March of 2020, where these movement restrictions led to the suspension of face-to-face data collections for household surveys. And given this contingency, the Statistics Division of ECLAC prepared a number of recommendations that were published in 2 documents that are online in the internet, where we basically made a monitor of the situation, a monitoring of the situation, and we focus on, obviously, on social indicators through household surveys. We also had some virtual webinars that were transmitted over the knowledge transmission network of the Statistical Conference of the Americas. And this series of recommendations paid particular attention to the properties that were inherent to this concept of sampling strategy. That is defined as a pair. On the one hand, you have this sampling design. On the other hand, you have the estimation scheme. And it was possible for us to address these new challenges and for countries in the region. these challenges that the pandemic installed, and at the end, or in the end, the national statistical offices, for them was possible to continue the data collection by migrating from a face-to-face collection mode to a telephone collection mode. So this is the situation for March of 2020. As I told you, this is this presentation will summarize the situation from March 2020. So we have three scenarios. The countries face these restrictions maybe in the second or third week of March. And we released our first document of recommendation. And in that document, we split or divide our recommendations for March and for the remaining months. So March of 2020 was separated from the subsequent months. And because normal survey activities were interrupted in March for most countries, first and second week of that month, where the national statistical offices were collecting data face to face, and then suddenly they had to change. And we had like three situations. We had national statistical offices that for their household surveys were facing poor coverage levels. And for that scenario, it was recommended not to use the information collected for the production of any official statistics. But we also had some national statistical offices that collected average coverage level, I mean, decent coverage levels. And it was recommended to modify the survey expansion factors and all of the weighting scheme in order to limit the bias and to publish national statistics only, and do not disaggregate as traditional. And in the third scenario, we had countries with acceptable coverage levels, and it was recommended to continue with the normal dissemination and publication process at the national level and subnational level. So we had these three scenarios in countries. Some countries did not publish anything because of the poor coverage. It was our recommendation, and for those that had like decent coverage, we recommended to just publish at the national level. And for the subsequent months, we recommended to use a panel, and IBGE, for example, did that, used a panel or a subsample of other months. And as long as movement restriction remained in force, it was impossible to carry out face-to-face data collection for countries because of these quarantines. And we had to, in the region, to modify how these surveys were carried out, and we adopted these telephone interviews. And of course, there are several challenges that were posed. And for example, one of them, the inability to access to the household in the sample, and for each period, a number of households that had been visited on previous occasions were replaced for new ones, and it was a challenge. And given that the telephone numbers of the household in the survey sample were collected for most of the countries in the first visit, then we had some data that we could use in order to select the households from past months. And as Francesca said, there was a second challenge that was related to the length and the content of the questionnaire. But at the end, telephone surveys had been conducted in many countries of the region. That was the telephone surveys were based on a sample from previous periods. So ECLAC suggested that the best strategy for selecting that panel was to follow up a complete sample from previous months or a subsample of previous months. But at the end, we rely on the probability sample and on the original design that was used in order to adjust sampling waste and to adjust the estimation scheme. And of course, we face this challenge, and as we are changing the collection modality from face-to-face interviews to a telephone-based modality, then maybe that that change or in the collection mode could yield to bias. Of course, we had a decrease in the response rate, but not always the increasing of the non-response rate yields to bias. However, we recommended to define this sample of households from a previous period and to search for possible bias. Because of not all of the households in the sample or in the original sample provided their telephone contact information. And some households, for example, provided their contact information, but at the very time of the interview, they did not live, for example, in the selected address. And some households, on the other hand, provided their contact information, but they did not respond. And some other household provided their contact information, but they have changed their contact telephone number, so we cannot reach them out. So, for example, if it is assumed that 85% of the sample provided the contact details, and the probability of a contacted household responding to the entire survey is 80%, then the total of the response that will be obtained was only 68%, and in the region the response rates were about 60 or 70%, in some cases 55%. So yes, we had a decrease in the non-response, a decrease in the response rate. But as we recommended to use a panel, maybe we could have an attrition effect on the panel. That is the loss of participants. The longer the panel is used for. So maybe there will be households that will stop responding to the survey because they were contacted repeatedly. And then that yield to a loss of effective respondents. So in that scenario, it was highly that responded households do not have similar characteristics to non-respondent or non-covered households, and that the reasons for household non-response to the survey were associated with the phenomenon that was being measured in the survey. For example, it could happen that more unemployed people in non-respondent households or non-response rates were higher among households living in poverty. And that was our suggestion and our recommendation from the statistics division in ECLAC, that we have had to be constantly searching for that structures in order to look for bias and to make, of course, some sort of correction later in the analysis. So we have basically 3 scenarios in presence of bias. In the figure on the left, you can see that graph that illustrates a case in where there is no bias or little bias. But we also have the other scenarios where we have positive bias and negative bias. So we have some countries where after searching comprehensively for biases, at the end, it looks like the covariates or the structure of the response looks like there were no bias, but we have a bunch of countries that after looking for bias, we can correct it, that phenomenon, and they published unbiased statistics. So we recommended to use 2 approaches in order to look for that bias and to correct the sampling weights. The first one, it is known as the propensity score approach. It was proposed by Rosenbaum and Rubin in 1983. And basically, it is a model that uses the responses and non-responses and link that structure with some covariates. And we could use this model in order to eliminate bias, given basically that our recommendation of using a panel yield to available covariates, useful covariates in terms of the estimation of the propensity score, and they included sex, age, educational level, area and geographical region of residence, but also occupational status, per capita household income in the past period. So that was used in order to adjust the expansion factor or the sampling weight, as you can see in this slide. And we also recommended to use a 2-stage calibration in order to correct for the bias. And basically, that was proposed by Sardal in 2007, and we use the covariates of the previous periods in order to, in a second stage, use those covariates, for example, total of per capita income, occupation status, branch of activity, level of education, etc. And of course, we also use the usual socio-demographic structure given by age, subnational region counts, area, and sex that were available from demographic projections. And our message to NSOs was, do not simply wait. Do not simply wait. Look for biases, because if you don't, then maybe you are disseminating and publishing biased statistics. And this graph shows a simulation in where here in the blue line, I hope that you can see that blue line that is the parameter of interest. And the green line, the green lines and the red lines were the estimations that were provided with the use of the propensity score, the green one, or the 2-stage calibration approach, that was the red line. And in the right, in the figure of the right, you can see that here all of these simulations yield to unbiased statistics. However, if you just wait, you just use the the telephone answered and just wait the usual way, then you will have some trouble if the structure of the non-response is not at random completely or at random. So we assisted a lot of countries in order to achieve these new adjustments in the sampling weights. And here you can find our COVID publications. They are available on the web. Now, in summarize, we recommended the publication of official statistics based on the probabilistic selection of household samplings, and we did not recommend imputation or predictive models or the use of some other techniques. We recommended that from a probabilistic panel to conduct the surveys by telephone, while slowly returning to face-to-face interviews. And in case where response rates were very low, it was recommended to not to publish, or to publish the statistics only at the national level, avoiding the usual disaggregation. We recommended to use the selection and coverage bias correction models via propensity score or two-stage calibration in order to adjust those sampling weights based on the auxiliary information that was available in the tracking panel. And now we have some other recommendations for returning to a new normal. And what is a new normal? We, in the statistics division in ECLAC, we hope that we, in the region, could learn something from what is happening. So we recommend to consider a transition period in which telephone operation continue to be carried out and maintaining flexibility because new confinements are possible. So we recommend to maintain this flexibility, not just return to a face-to-face collection mode and forget about the telephone mode. We recommend also to evaluate the possibility of continuing to use mixed surveys in this pandemic period, but not only in this pandemic period, but if it is suitable and after a comprehensive study, of course, maybe NSOs can use these mixed surveys as the new mode. We also recommended to reconcile face-to-face and telephone questionnaires to maintain this comparability in the construct that is being measured. And before fieldwork, collect contact information and basic household data during those households selected in the sampling, or for those households selected in the sample. And that last recommendation, it is very important because of if you approach, when you approach to the primary sample unit and you select the households or the dwellings, and if you collect the basic contact information and some other information, then you can perform telephone interviews after, and you can use those the information that was collected in order to adjust later the sampling weights. And this is very important because our next recommendation is regarding the final disposition codes, and we also performed some assistance to countries in that matter, because there are these standard final disposition codes for telephone collection modes and for face-to-face interviews. And in this scenario, I mean, during the pandemic, we actually did not perform a usual RDD sampling scheme that uses like random dial, digit dialing in order to select households. And those final disposition codes that are available as a standards are, I mean, they have to be adopted and adapted in a very serious way. We have to study every single event and to reclassify properly. And finally, adopt technical procedures for eliminating coverage and selection biases as regular processes for household surveys inside the National Statistical Offices, not only in this COVID-19 pandemic period, but we want that National Statistical Offices assume these processes as regular ones, and sampling weights can be adjusted for these non-coverage and non-response scenarios. So there is finally there is a topic that is very important, and is how do we assess the COVID impact into the official statistics that are published by the NSO. And yes, with the arrival of the pandemic, countries had to change several aspects of the survey that included not only collection mode, but what changed? It changed the collection mode, affecting the disposition codes, that changed. New weights adjustment schemes were introduced that previously were not considered. We have some calibration schemes that now are different from the previous ones. And it is very difficult to separate the effect of these changes here from the effect of the pandemic itself. So it is recommended to maintain, if possible, mixed mode collection schemes during a reasonable time in the post-pandemic period in order to separate those effects and to achieve comparability and to assess what was the effect that the collection mode, that the change of collection mode had on the estimates. So actually, NSO can perform parallel independent surveys with appropriate sample sizes. It is also possible to maintain a telephone subsample, while face-to-face surveys can incorporate larger sizes, allowing for traditional disaggregations, and maybe gradually incorporation of face-to-face schemes while decreasing telephone schemes is possible also. But this very aspect of assessing the impact or the effect of COVID-19 it is very important, and National Statistical Offices has to do something about that. So with that was all for now. Thank you so much for having me here. Please do not hesitate to contact us, Rolando Campo, that is the chief of the division, and our director, Javier Mancero, that is the chief of the social statistical unit, and myself, Andres Gutierrez. Thank you so much, and congratulations for this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre, for sharing the excellent work that ICLAC has been conducting with countries in the region. We are still collecting questions from the floor, so please stay with us to address them. And as we move to our final presentation, last but definitely not least, I would like to invite my colleague, Marcelo Pita, who is coordinator of quantitative methods at Cetic.br. Marcelo, in face of... Hi, Marcelo. Marcelo, In face of the complexity of producing data in the context of the COVID-19 crisis, Cetic.br had to change not only its approach for collecting data, but also the scope of the questions that were addressed. So, Marcelo, please share with us the details of this work. You have the floor for 15 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you, Tatiana. I will share my screen in a moment. Is it okay? Are you seeing the screen?
Perfect.
Yes. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today to share with you some of our efforts in producing public statistics during the COVID-19 pandemic. The focus of my presentation will be the pilot project we conduct in Cetic.br, combining non-probability samples and probability samples in order to produce ICT indicators. As the previous presentations already mentioned, the data collection during the pandemic was very much affected. The use of alternative modes of data collection became the standard overnight, but using, in general, incomplete or partial frames. Traditional surveys, which are the golden standard to produce public and official statistics, often use probability sampling from complete frames, which is very important. And data is collected by traditional methods, face-to-face, telephone, and web channels. These traditional methods are facing increasing non-response rates. At the same time, official and public statistics producers have been dealing with an increasing demand for timely and more disaggregated data. This is happening while resources for statistics production are decreasing. In this scenario, non-probability surveys are emerging as a possible solution to overcome some of these issues. They are cheaper and faster to release, but at the cost of having some bias. Recently published papers propose approaches to overcome this bias. One of them is to use a probability sample as a reference to weight the non-probability sample, what we used in our pilot project. This approach is model-based and adds complexity to the statistics production. But considering the pandemic scenario and the need for timely data on ICT statistics, we in Cetic.br has conducted a pilot project based on a panel survey of internet users, a non-probability panel, using as the probability reference survey, the ICT household survey. The target population of the panel survey was defined as internet users aged 16 years and older in Brazil. The domains of interest for this survey were sex, level of education, region, age group, socioeconomic status, and socioeconomic status. Two frames were used, a web frame of individuals and a telephone list. We adopted the telephone list as a strategy to reach a broader section of the target population and collect data from poorer and less educated individuals. The sample design of the panel survey was quota sample, quotas established based on the variables defining the domains of interest. Around 19,000 emails were sent, and more than 72,000 phone calls were made. The final sample included approximately 2,600 respondents. The reference survey we used in this pilot project is the annual ICT household survey, the one from 2019. The target population of this survey is the Brazilian households and all individuals 10 years and older residing in permanent private Brazilian households. It adopts the official frame of census tracts, and it has a sample size around 30,000 households selected through a probabilistic sample design. In order to use this method of combination of samples, a non-probability sample and a probability sample, and to be able to do it in a reliable way, some conditions must be met. These conditions are defined as common support. To achieve this, both surveys must be carried out for the same reference period, collect a range of variables in the same way, overlapping questions, address the same target population, and have no intersection of respondents. In our pilot, however, the two reference periods are not the same. The probabilistic sample is from 2019, the panel survey, the non-probabilistic sample, is from 2020.
It's 12 hours.
We have included in the panel survey a range of questions that were formulated in the same way as in the ICT survey. We do not have precise information on the coverage of the non-probabilistic sampling frames. The possibility of having respondents that answered both surveys is very remote. To produce a reliable statistics, these two issues with interrogation marks need to be addressed. We adopt a strategy from modeling to treat these issues. Our approach involved estimating the size of the target population using the data collected by ICT survey, estimating pseudo-inclusion probabilities for the panel sample units, identifying the part of the internet user population represented by respondents of the panel survey, using estimated propensity scores of being an internet user, estimating variance using Bootstrap. This graph shows the whole process of combination of both samples. By updating the totals of the ICT survey, we attempt to have a more accurate estimate of population totals for the time when the panel survey was carried out. Based on common questions, we looked for a model to estimate the propensity of being an internet user in the probabilistic sample. This model was used to estimate the propensity scores of being an internet user for the panel survey's respondents. By comparing the propensity scores in both surveys, we were able to evaluate the representativeness of the panel survey. To access the part of the target population that could be represented by the panel, we estimated pseudo-inclusion probabilities for the panel based on 4 cutting points of propensity of being an internet user. The 4 possibilities are whole sample, no cutting point. We consider as common support the whole target population, scores greater or equal to 2/3, scores greater or equal to 3/4, and scores greater or equal to 4/5. In all these 4 possibilities, pseudo-inclusion probabilities were turned into weights that were later calibrated to non-population totals. The model used to estimate propensity scores for internet users was adequate. 2 statistics are shown in this slide. But the comparison of the distribution of propensity score for internet users in the ICT survey and in the panel survey revealed that the panel survey has respondents with much larger scores, very different distributions. To decide to what extent the panel survey respondents represent the target population, we compare the results of the calibration factor statistics for each of the 4 possible cut points we chose. In this table, it's important to evaluate and choose which option has a better distribution for the factors. The 2/3 cut point option showed the best statistics, having 75% of its weight calibration factors between 0.5 and 1, and the mean weighting factor closer to 1. With this selection, we estimate that the panel sample represents 101 million of internet users, less than the estimated target population of 121 million. The represented population has some difference. It is younger, more educated, richer, and more likely to be computer users, as can be seen in this chart and the chart in the next slide. Despite this difference, the panel results were released. After all, we have information for over 8% of internet users 16 years and older in Brazil. Evaluating pros and cons, we can say that as advantages, data were collected avoiding face-to-face interviews. The whole survey took less than 2 months to complete. Cost of data collection was much cheaper than for a traditional face-to-face survey. As disadvantages, the web panel frame recruitment is not clear and not meant to address a specific population. Coverage issues remain, despite using a probability sample as a reference. The combination of data didn't avoid the remaining coverage problem. Approach is model dependent. We used 2 models, we needed 2 models to end up with good results, but good models may not always be available. And explanation of this methodology and its dissemination is very complex. As final remarks, we can highlight that the use of non-probability sampling for surveys is increasing. Use of a reference probability sample survey to weight the non-probability sample is an attempt to produce more reliable and accurate estimates. Probability sample surveys will continue to be needed if they are to serve as reference samples for weighting more frequent non-probability surveys. Approaches to weight the non-probability samples are still being developed. There's still much to be done. One final information, UNCTAD will release tomorrow a report on e-commerce indicators, and the results of our panel will be there. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Marcelo, for sharing this truly very interesting approach that you have taken, and congratulations on this excellent work. I would like to take the opportunity to mention that the survey results, they bring very interesting findings, and they can be downloaded in our website. So please be encouraged to find them online. We have a few minutes. We are already over time, but I would like to open a few minutes for questions from the floor. And at this time, perhaps I could check if Francesca, Vivek, and Eduardo are still with us, along with André, perhaps for a final round of comments. Are you still with us?
Yes, Tatiana.
You're welcome to join us, Francesca. Eduardo, are you still with us? Andres?
Yes, I'm here.
We can't see you. If you could please turn your cameras on. So I will read a few general questions. Thank you. We can see you now. I will read a few general questions, and I will give the floor to all of you. You can either choose to address them or perhaps to make a final round of comments as we close. So we received 2 very interesting questions. One that is very concerned with the quality of standards. Sergio wants to know, he says, statistical data goes through sample validation processes and technological methods that process data. So why do we not strive for standards, and why do we not encourage continuous improvements in existing standards? This is a concern that he has raised. And Javiera is interested in learning more about the challenges faced by different countries amidst the pandemic. And she wants to know, what are the main trade-offs that has been faced in terms of data production? For example, in terms of international comparability, is this a priority right now? What are the main trade-offs that countries have been dealing with? And finally, Isabella, she wants to know, considering the fact that traditional probability surveys were facing an increasing non-response rates during the pandemic, she says, we have started to use same sampled units and access them by telephone. And how do we avoid attrition with the selected households? This is a more specific question, perhaps Marcelo would like to answer, or Andres. So I think I will call on Francesca to begin, either to address a question or for a final comment as a wrap-up.
Yeah, thank you, Tatiana, and thanks again for giving us the opportunity to contribute to this. Perhaps I'll address the issue of standards for a moment, and then also the issue of the trade-off, international comparability versus other priorities that countries might have. And I think the two go together, because I think, yes, we should promote the standards, and I think efforts should focus on ensuring maintaining the level of quality in the data, right? And I think what we do and what I heard from colleagues in their presentations, I think that's exactly the approach we're all taking, of finding either mixed approaches or integrating new data sources with within the official statistical system, exactly with that in mind, trying to bring the data together and trying to ensure the adherence to standards and principles to maintain a level of quality. And once I think you ensure that in the process, you also satisfy the need for international comparability, because international comparability is nothing but exactly that if you follow the standards and if you follow the agreed principles by the global statistical community, you do have then international comparability, which is certainly not in the mind of countries when they have to satisfy the immediate challenges, but ultimately we will be able to maintain that. So I would say my final comments is about that, is about really finding that balance of satisfying the immediate needs by still maintaining adherence to our principles, including what we discussed earlier about privacy, still focusing on how we ensure data protection and protection of privacy, especially in the use of new data sources. Over to you.
Thank you, Francesca. Andres, perhaps you could also give a few words as your final comment and address either questions.
Sorry, I was mute. I want to refer to the first question that kindly, I mean, it is not a question. It is a call that invite us to use standards. Why not to use standard methods? And this is why we do in the division of statistics in ECLAC. We train staff from NSO, but not only trained, but we are always discussing the best way to achieve this standardization in order to accomplish the publication of official statistics, and that we want to reassure that these published statistics remain unbiased. And here in the region, there is or there were months ago this question about if I change the collection mode from face-to-face to telephone, and if I change these adjustments in the weighting scheme, then the resulting estimates will not be comparable to the traditional ones. And our answer was that's I mean, it is better to produce unbiased statistics, and then we can concern later in terms of the comparability. But at first you have to do whatever it takes, and with the standardization, in order to produce unbiased statistics. And that was what we were trying to do with countries. Not only change from face-to-face to telephone and just wait and publish. No, wait, because maybe you can have some bias. And also, as you are depending on a panel, then you can take advantage of that covariates that were present available in that panel in order to correct the weighting scheme and just to publish official statistics that were unbiased. But right now we have this this question of how to get comparability from these schemes. Now we have mixed mode schemes, and it was my final comments on the presentation were related to that topic. National statistical offices had to do a lot of work there in order to assess what was the effect or the impact of the change of mode, of the change of in the weighting scheme, in order to differentiate or to separate that effect from the COVID effect. So there is a long way ahead of us, and yeah, ECLAC is here in order to help countries and staff inside the national statistical offices to attend that standardization that Fabio maybe asked for. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Andres. Marcelo, we are over time, but you have 1 minute for your final considerations.
I would like to ask you to repeat the question of Isabella. It's not in the Q&A.
So she says, considering the fact that traditional probability surveys were facing an increasing non-response rate, during the pandemic, we start to use the same sampled units and access them by telephone. How do we avoid attrition with the selected households?
We will do that in Cetic by next month. We will start a survey that collects information through telephone with households that participate in our last 3 surveys. We will deal with that when it comes back, the respondents and the answers. We will see if there is any difference. We will try to update the totals and try to update the information. This type these methodologies of combining and using different modes and reusing surveys and samples from the past, it's still in the beginning. The study of these methodologies is still in the beginning. There are no quality standards or methodological standards yet defined by UN or any other official statistical office. We are all trying and experimenting during the pandemic. Concerning the problem of increasing non-response rates that's happening everywhere, I would like to remember yesterday's webinar. It's important for people to understand that their data is important for policymakers and stakeholders to have information and make good decisions. And data literacy is one point that could enforce and make people be more, respond more frequently, more often to our surveys. That's it.
Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you very much. And indeed, we are learning as we go. And I really commend all the efforts of the data producers that are dealing with this enormous crisis and it really have stepped up to the challenge. And I hope that this is truly an opportunity for learning as we go. So unfortunately, our time is up for today. We are, in fact, over time. We had a lot of questions coming in. A big thank you to all the speakers for their time, and also to all the participants that have stayed with us until the very end of the session with great interest and enthusiasm. Thank you very much indeed. Our last session tomorrow will cover the topic of alternative sources for data production in the context of COVID-19. And I really look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.